April 14, 1943. The air over the North Atlantic shimmered with the heat of combat anticipation. Somewhere between Scotland and Iceland, a young pilot named Lieutenant Richard "Rick" Halstead prepared for his next sortie. At 22, he had already flown countless missions, yet nothing in his training had prepared him for the moral and tactical choice that would come to define his legacy. Rick Halstead was no ordinary flyer. From his earliest days in flight school, he had been meticulous, a perfectionist, and fiercely loyal to his squadron. He understood aircraft, not just as machines, but as extensions of his own will. His instructors often remarked that he knew a plane better than it knew itself, a statement that would soon prove chillingly literal. The squadron gathered at dawn, engines humming, dew still clinging to wings. Rick's plane, a P-38 Lightning, gleamed under the rising sun, its twin engines purring with restrained power. Today's mission was reconnaissance, low-altitude patrol along the German-occupied Norwegian coastline. The Allies had reason to believe that enemy shipping movements were increasing, and they needed eyes in the sky. As the squadron took off, Rick felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. The ocean stretched endlessly below, cold and indifferent. He checked his instruments. Altimeter steady, fuel levels normal, guns primed. Yet a subtle unease settled in his chest, an instinctive sense that today would be different. Hours passed in tense observation. Enemy vessels were sighted intermittently, their movements erratic. Radio chatter crackled, relaying coordinates, enemy sightings, and tactical adjustments. Rick reported everything meticulously, his voice calm, betraying none of the anxiety building within him. By mid-afternoon, the squadron approached a narrow fjord where German cargo ships were rumored to be unloading munitions. Visibility was limited. The low sun glinted off the water, creating deceptive reflections. As the lead pilots prepared to engage, Rick noticed a critical malfunction in his plane's fuel line. One of the twin engines was losing pressure, sputtering sporadically. "Engine 1, losing output. Might not hold for a full run," he whispered into his headset. This was a problem. At low altitude, over enemy territory, with limited fuel, any engine failure could be catastrophic. Yet retreating would leave the mission incomplete and potentially endanger the rest of his squadron. Rick's mind raced. Every option carried deadly consequences. Suddenly, enemy anti-aircraft fire erupted. Tracers arced through the sky like deadly sparks. The squadron scattered, each pilot maneuvering instinctively to avoid being hit. Rick's engine failed entirely. The P-38 shuddered violently. Control surfaces became sluggish. The fjord below offered no safe landing spots, only jagged cliffs and freezing water. Rick realized that if he attempted to land in the fjord, not only would he risk his life, but he might also endanger civilians nearby. The alternative, climbing back to the squadron, was impossible. The failing engine would not sustain the climb. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds became eternity. He considered ditching the plane over the fjord, but the chance of survival was slim. Parachuting was also fraught. The cliffs could shear a chute, or the icy water could claim him instantly. It was then that Rick made a decision that would haunt him, even in the later years of peace. He would shoot down his own plane. Not in rage, not in surrender, but in controlled precision, ensuring the aircraft would crash in an unpopulated area, minimizing collateral damage and keeping his squadron's position secret from the enemy. He adjusted the throttle, aligned the plane over a deserted stretch of coastline, and calculated the glide path. The P-38 shuddered again, betraying its impending failure. Rick's hands were steady, his breaths measured. He engaged the guns, not to destroy himself, but to initiate a controlled explosion at a safe distance. Moments later, the plane's fuselage ignited, the explosion sending a plume of smoke into the sky. Rick had timed everything so that he could bail out moments later. Parachute deployed, wind tearing at his helmet, salt water spraying as he descended into the cold fjord. He hit the water with a shock that stole his breath, but he was alive. Behind him, the P-38 became a fiery monument to the impossible choice he had made. Rescue came within hours. Allied forces, alerted by radio, retrieved him from the fjord. On board, Rick remained silent, contemplating the enormity of what he had done. His squadron had not been compromised. Enemy forces had no knowledge of the reconnaissance mission, nor of his presence in the fjord. Debriefings followed. Officers questioned every detail, why the decision was made, what alternative actions had been considered. Rick explained in measured tones, emphasizing the calculated nature of his actions, the imperative to preserve both lives and strategic information. His actions, though unconventional, were recognized as brilliant under the circumstances. He had chosen a path that defied convention, demonstrating extraordinary courage and situational awareness. News of the incident circulated quietly, classified for wartime security. Few understood the full story, and those who did spoke only in whispers of the pilot who had deliberately sacrificed his own aircraft to save lives and protect intelligence. The psychological impact on Rick was profound. He struggled with guilt and relief, pride and horror, emotions that would linger long after the war. In letters home, he wrote cryptically about the moment. Sometimes the sky forces you to choose between the impossible and the unimaginable. The mission became a case study in military aviation schools. Instructors highlighted the ethical dilemma, the decision-making under extreme pressure, and the importance of prioritizing human life and strategic goals over material assets. Rick's experience taught future pilots that sometimes survival requires audacity, and heroism is measured not in glory, but in impossible choices made with precision. Over the following months, Rick flew again, each mission a reminder of that fateful day. He remained meticulous, cautious, yet ever aware that the line between life and death could hinge on a single decision. He shared his story sparingly, ensuring that the lessons were learned without sensationalizing the trauma endured. In retrospect, Rick's action was emblematic of the complexity of modern aerial warfare, where split-second choices, mechanical failures, environmental hazards, and human ethics intersect in ways that defy conventional judgment. By the end of Section 1, the stage is set. A young, skilled pilot, faced with an impossible situation, makes a decision that is both courageous and tragic. The narrative tension, the technical details of aviation, the moral and emotional complexity all converge to create a story that resonates far beyond the moment of the crash. Aftermath, investigation, and legacy. The day after the controlled crash, Lieutenant Rick Halstead sat quietly in a temporary barracks near the fjord. His uniform was soaked from the icy water, but his mind was still racing. Around him, other pilots whispered about the impossible choice he had made, the audacity of shooting down his own aircraft. Some admired him, others feared the implications. If anyone else had tried such a thing without his skill, it would have ended in death. Naval intelligence officers arrived at first light, notebooks and clipboards in hand. They questioned every detail: flight path, engine readings, weather conditions, enemy activity, and the precise sequence of events leading to the controlled crash. Rick answered calmly, methodically, providing technical explanations and emphasizing the calculated nature of his actions. Every decision had been deliberate, every second accounted for. "Lieutenant," one officer said, "you've potentially saved lives, but at tremendous risk to yourself. Was there truly no alternative?" Rick nodded. "None that could guarantee the mission or safety. I weighed every option, Ditching without control could have endangered civilians or the squadron. This was the only solution. The investigation went on for weeks. Pilots were debriefed, engineers examined the wreckage, and meteorologists reconstructed wind patterns. The Navy's conclusion was unanimous. Rick's action, though unconventional, had been a precise, calculated decision that exemplified extraordinary judgment under extreme pressure. Yet, the psychological toll on Rick was heavy. He had deliberately destroyed an aircraft he had come to know intimately. Every bolt, every wire, every panel had been under his care, and now it lay in ruins, submerged in the cold fjord. He struggled with relief and guilt in equal measure. Relief that no one had died, guilt for the destruction he had caused. In letters home he wrote sparingly, hinting at the ordeal, but never fully describing the magnitude of what he had done. The sky tests more than skill. It tests judgment, courage, and the weight of choice. The Navy quietly recognized him for his action. While he did not receive public accolades due to the sensitive nature of the mission, internally, his commanders praised him as an exemplary officer. Flight schools later incorporated the incident into case studies, teaching students how to assess catastrophic mechanical failure, environmental hazards, and ethical decision-making simultaneously. Historians later reflected on the broader implications. Rick's action represented a confluence of human skill, moral courage, and technical understanding. He had not simply saved himself. He had preserved operational secrecy, safeguarded his squadron, and prevented potential civilian casualties. In a single, terrifying moment, the fate of many rested in one man's hands. Over time, Rick shared his story with select colleagues and students. He emphasized the balance between instinct and training, risk and reward, ethics and pragmatism. He became a symbol of the complexity of aerial warfare, a reminder that victory often depended not on firepower alone, but on the ability to make impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure. Decades later, aviation historians revisited the event. They analyzed flight telemetry, environmental data, and cockpit recordings recovered from similar missions. Rick's actions were confirmed to be technically flawless, executed with precision despite the chaos of the situation. The controlled crash became a touchstone for studies on emergency decision-making and crisis leadership. In the public imagination, the story of the pilot who shot down his own plane gained a mythic quality. Documentaries depicted the sequence in cinematic detail. The shudder of engines, the icy water, the tension in the cockpit, the calm decisiveness of a young man confronting mortality. Rick's narrative blended human drama with technical brilliance, inspiring generations of aviators and ordinary people alike. The emotional resonance of the story endured. Rick often reflected on the paradox of heroism. It is measured not by destruction, but by preservation of life, of mission integrity, and of moral responsibility. Every year, veterans would recount the tale to new pilots, instilling lessons in courage, judgment, and the heavy responsibility that comes with command. In retrospect, the incident served as a testament to the unpredictability of war and the extraordinary capacities of human decision-making. It reminded everyone that in aviation, as in life, sometimes survival and success depend on the ability to confront impossible choices with clarity, courage, and ethical fortitude. Even in his later years, Rick's story continued to captivate scholars, filmmakers, and military strategists. Interviews and memoirs preserved his voice, his reflections, and his lessons. The controlled crash, which Time had classified, became a case study in how one individual's judgment could alter the outcome of potentially catastrophic events. And so, Lieutenant Richard "Rick" Halstead became more than a pilot. He became a symbol of calm in chaos, of moral courage under pressure, and of the complex interplay between human skill, ethical judgment, and technological mastery. Though the plane he shot down lay at the bottom of the fjord, his story soared across decades, teaching that heroism is not always found in glory or in victory, but in the willingness to make the impossible choice and live with its consequences.